You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. Trent Fleskins, your host, as always. We have Chris Ferreira from the Forever Project back in again to chat for a second time on our top tips for reducing our energy bill and our water bill. Chris, thanks for coming in again, mate.
Pleasure. I ran in today, so there you go.
Mate, I'm super interested in this side because it's one of those ones where you can control the outcome, right?
Yes.
And not only just from a new build or a new development, but also things we can change along the way too. Because one thing I think that is for certain, they always say death and taxes, right?
Yes.
I think the third one these days is increasing utility bills.
Oh, and it's a great way to start, and I always muse on this. So we have lost 5 prime ministers and countless premiers exactly on utilities and a price on carbon and power bills going up. And Tony Abbott, I think, shamelessly exploited this idea that we have this deep-seated hatred of increased power bills. Okay, the reality is, I hope for enlightened leaders who will say our power prices and our water prices have to go up, ... But my government is committed to helping you slash your consumption. Yeah. Because we understand that we don't want you to pay more, so we're going to show you how to use less. And here's the kicker: when you learn how to use less, you will have a much more comfortable and an enjoyable place to live.
Because there are 2 ways to bring that price down. One way is the rate goes down. That ain't happening. The other way is you just use less.
That's right. And if you remember back to our first talk, where we are the fastest drying part of the world's driest continent and we are running out of water, well, that's not reflected in the price. You can buy the cheapest 6-pack of dodgy beer and it'll be more expensive than it would cost you to fill a swimming pool with water. Now, what is that saying to people?
Well, people don't value it, obviously.
That's right.
If it doesn't cost you money,
Exactly.
it doesn't matter if you waste it.
And the same with power. Now, there will be people who will be shaking their fists at me saying that. That's one side of the coin, which is we need to make power expensive, particularly when we move beyond what is a fair and reasonable consumption. I believe once you start using above what's been worked, and we know exactly what is an average amount of water and energy consumption for whatever the household size, I believe as soon as you start using more than that, smash the hell out of their consumption.
That's on you.
Yeah, that's right, because it's irresponsible. We have to think from a community perspective that, again, water is precious and so is power.
You think that there's actually some market forces we can put into play here to create an extremely punitively tiered marginal tax rate, I guess, on water? You know, where it goes, the first so many litres is really quite cheap because that's everyone
probably
should
even
have
subsidised.
Everyone should have a certain amount of water, and then as it goes up, it gets to a point where, mate, you're paying for this at a $1 per litre sort of thing.
We have a similar sort of understanding about speeding. You go 5-10 kilometres above the speed limit, you get a certain amount. If you are incredibly reckless and you're driving 120 in a school zone, you'll probably lose your license. Yeah. So we understand that there is an exponential increase in your responsibility if society is deemed that what you're doing is irresponsible for the greater good. And I would challenge, and I mentioned this in our first talk, there is nothing more precious in a functioning civilization than access to beautiful, clean drinking water, limitless. It's the foundation of every wonderful civilization. So, okay.
What's our first tip?
Okay.
I think our first tip should be talking about, let's talk about improving our garden use.
Okay, so water. And the most important thing that will shock most people is, firstly, most of the water that is used is not industry, it's not agriculture, it's our homes.
It's residential.
Yeah, 80% of the water that is available is used by us as domestic users. And when you look at an individual house, the biggest chunk of water goes onto the garden. It's about 45 to 50% of the water.
That surprises me. I always thought my showers were the most guilt-formed part of my day.
And that's why you have a grey water system, so you can lessen the guilt because you go, well, it's going out into the garden. But we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to learn how to effectively put that in place, because councils are starting to mandate that as part of developments. But they seem so poorly thought out in terms of the required square meterage to effectively put these in. But we'll talk about that later.
Okay, so if we assume that the biggest chunk of water goes into the garden, what we need to be embracing is what we call a water-wise garden. Now, please suspend in your head what a water-wise garden is. Any garden can be a water-wise garden. And the key principles are, number one, we have to improve that soil. If people remember my first talk, I said we have the worst soils in the world. So you need to build that soil up, because it's a little bit like if you had a fancy car and you were really keen about reducing the amount of petrol you had to spend to keep the car running, but there were holes in the fuel tank, and you hadn't worked out why you were using so much petrol every week, and someone went, have you known you got all these holes in the fuel tank? Once you plug them up, you would just suddenly be so much happier and use a lot less water.
So we need to go to Bunnings and buy a potting mix for a whole backyard?
So for our gardens, potting mix is for pots. For the soil, we use soil improver or compost. And here's the big one. If you are on sandy soil, prick your ears up here.
Somewhere in the city of Joondalup?
Yep. Most of the Swan Coastal Plain. So if you're not in the hills, chances are, and if you're not near a river, chances are you have crappy sand. You must add clay. You add clay and compost, you will transform your sandy soil so it no longer leaks.
Well, that would be the same for any new development, because when you think about a builder coming in, putting their pad down, they're normally using bricky sand.
That's right. And we've done work with developers through the Water Corporation where we have gone in and done some project landscapes for the front verge. You know, you get the house and land package with the verge, and we've done these transformational alternatives to what's rolled out normally, and we build the soil up. We put the clay and the compost into the soil, so you build a decent soil. If you can then add the clay and the compost, and the clay helps to hold the water and nutrients around the plants, so you get much greater efficiency. When you can do that, improve the clay and the compost component, you can halve the amount of water you use.
That's so funny, because clay is one of the most evil words around in development, because we don't want clay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. But it's like anything. It's a fantastic additive to turn your sand into something decent. And I use the analogy, if you were trying to bake bread or brew beer, you know that you have to add a key component like yeast to get it to work.
Yeah, and a lot of forms, yeast is a bad thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
So clay, think of the clay like you would the yeast in your brewing. You use the right amount, the right type, at the right application, and it transforms that process.
Where are we going to get this stuff? If we can do it in a more cost-effective way, is there a couple of places around Perth where you think head there?
Anywhere now, anywhere from Mitre 10 to Bunnings to Dawson's to Waldex, Better Pets and Gardens, they all now sell clay. If you want to buy it in bulk, you can get it from stock feeders, but anyone now sells clay.
So if you're doing your own landscaping on a new build or a new development, don't just go straight in for the pots in the sand. You're just shooting yourself in the foot.
That's right.
Get yourself some good mix,
absolutely,
clay-based mix first.
Indeed, and it's a little bit like, we have the worst soils in the world. Someone once said, don't put your $20 plant in 5-cent soil.
Yeah.
And we have 5-cent soil. That's on a good day. You have to build that sand into decent soil, so you should be able to grab it in your hand, squeeze it, and when you release the pressure, it stays in a shape.
Okay.
Whereas your sand won't. Okay, so
falls out. Yeah.
That's right. And number 2 is the water repellency. So that's that thin veneer of wax where the water won't go into the soil. And if you remember the 11th commandment from our first talk, that thou shalt use the water and the nutrients where they fall. So where it falls from the sky from rain, or you're adding irrigation, if that water doesn't go into the soil, the plant did not get a drink. So the water repellency, which is a thin veneer of wax, it's a naturally occurring process. We have the worst water repellency in the world, in this part of the world. So if you don't deal with that, break that wax, it means even if you can see the water dripping off the leaves of the plant, it's not going into the ground. Again, if you crossed the Simpson Desert and you were seriously dehydrated, but I put you in the shower and taped your mouth closed with masking tape, would you rehydrate?
No, you wouldn't.
You wouldn't.
So how are we fixing this?
So we add wetting agents and the clay. The clay will naturally draw the water into the soil, but the first aid for your crappy sand is a good wetting agent. And if people are wondering if they have water repellency, you have.
So head out to your mate's house in Kalamunda with a wheelbarrow, fill it up, drive back to your place.
Trouble with that is it can be diseased. So we have 3 virulent pathogens in our soil. One is Phytophthora, which you might know as Jarrah dieback.
Yep.
And if you transport from Kalamunda, Jarrahdale, where it's quite rife through the soil, and we're in the age of COVID, so we know about hygiene and distancing, Don't do that.
It's same with plants.
Stay with a good, clean clay that you can buy from any of those garden centres or Bunnings, Mitre 10.
Okay.
So use a really good wetting agent and put that onto the landscape. Use your water-wise plants. So any good nursery now will tell you a water-wise plant is a plant that's been proven through studies to do well on one watering or less a week in summer. How amazing is that? Plants that will thrive. I know plants that once they're established, you'll never water them again. And they're beautiful. Okay, so my favourite group they're called the Eremophilas. Now, they're a group of plants that grow naturally through the rangelands and the deserts of WA, some of the hardest environments in the world. So they now have been cultivated. So they've been bred to enhance their flower and their shape and their form. And you can now put those in your garden. And again, they will happily thrive on no more than one watering a month. There are so many beautiful, tough plants like that will come into that mix.
Are these things that we would see driving up Indian Ocean Drive?
Yep, and if you drive into T1, T2 airport, if you drive into any of the new big facades for new subdivisions, if you look at any of the beautiful landscaping, you are now seeing as the pride and place are often these beautiful plants.
A lot of them look like lavenders.
Some of them look like lavenders. They're beautiful. The daintiness of their flowers belies the fact that these are super tough plants. Go to Kings Park. I urge everyone to go September, October to Kings Park, and you will be blown away. We have the most beautiful plants anywhere on the planet.
We just don't seem... It seems like Kings Park is sort of the Garden of Eden in WA, and you rarely see that proliferated around the suburbs.
That's right.
It just seems like we don't appreciate the plants we've got.
That's right. And you've hit the nail on the head, and that's a big part of what we do with our workshops.
We all want to make our backyard barley.
Indeed. And that's where once you begin to see these plants for what they are, my first talk was about accepting where you are and embracing where you are. It's a very powerful spiritual or mental health strategy, is to accept where you are and who you are and what are your circumstances. And it's the same with our landscaping. Once you begin to see that these are beautiful plants, you will fall in love with them and they will captivate you in a way that is just inconceivable without doing it.
Okay, so that first tip, so we can keep a bit of concision to our what will be a very long segment today. First tip is make sure that soil is clay-based and we're using natives. Second tip, let's go back inside the house, talk about internal fittings and making it that more effective. Is it about putting a timer on your kid's shower?
Yes, that helps, and it's my experience is it's the wives and sometimes the husbands and all of that. So putting those timers, the little egg timers are good. They just give you that reminder. You can now get Wells rated fittings, so you can now get water efficient fittings. They're mandatory in all new developments that you have to have these water wise fittings. Any plumber, tap fitting place now sells them. It's Wells, WELS, minimum of 4-star. So you can get all those fittings. That'll make a big difference. If you don't have room for a grey water system. Now, I'm a big fan of grey water.
Tell me about a grey water system, what it is.
So a grey water system is using water from the laundry and the shower. It's not the toilet, it's not the sink, there's too much grease and all that other stuff. So it's the laundry and the shower. And it's called grey water because that's kind of what it looks like when it comes up.
It's not black water, it's not clean
black
water.
Water is sewage water. Yeah. And that's illegal to put into the garden in WA without a very sophisticated system. But you can buy fantastic grey water systems. I've got one at my place. I've had it for 10 years. And it's a self-cleaning system. It's about the size of a big esky. And it just puts water straight out through specially designed irrigation systems. It's called drip irrigation, and it's a purple colour. That's the legal colour for grey water. Okay. So the health department gets very antsy about us being in contact with treated wastewater.
So instead of having your black PVC irrigation that you get from Bunnings, it's a purple colour.
Yep, and it's
very interesting.
Yeah, and it's every plumber knows about it. Every irrigation shop will sell it. So these grey water systems fitted will be about $2,500. Now, the caveat with the grey water, you've got to have enough people using the laundry and the shower to make it work, and you have to have enough room. So 2 questions people need to ask themselves: how many people are in the family, and how much room do I have? So if you are on your own or there's just 2 of you and you've got a tiny garden, grey water's probably not for you. But if you've got a decent-sized block, at least 200 or 300 square metres of garden, and you've got a big rambling family, knock your socks off. Get a grey water system because that will
be cost-effective?
It will. You'll use probably half the scheme water that you would have traditionally.
So what happens? How do you then make sure you're not just, or if you've got your normal sort of solenoids and retic system?
Yep.
How do you make sure you're not just overdoing it with that? Given that you've got this great booster with the grey water, does it feed in somehow?
No, so the grey water will be a separate irrigation system, but my experience is that so I have areas of my garden where the only irrigation it gets is the grey water. So the key is that if you're going away in the middle of summer and it's stinking hot and no one's there, then your plants will suffer. But if you have a grey water system that's going to be continually used, particularly over summer, then that can be a fantastic substitute for traditional irrigation. It's about half my watering needs is through grey water.
Can it be used on all sorts of plants and grass?
My experience is lawn, it's challenging because you're not allowed to spray grey water onto gardens.
Okay.
Onto trafficable areas like lawn. So I would say keep your grey water for things like fruit trees and natives. And that will be fine.
Yeah, and then your normal retic sits on the grass at the front.
Yep.
Okay, cool. What about rainwater tanks? Whenever a lot of people think about rainwater tanks, there's this big cylindrical things that take up. And we think about urban infill, right?
Yep.
We don't have a lot of space for these huge cylindrical rainwater tanks. So there's some new technology in the profiles of these things, isn't there?
There is. So there's now slim water tanks. Some are called water wall, where they piece together like Meccano, or they click together, and they might be about 70 or 80 centimetres wide. Okay, the thing about grey water, I love grey water. It's fantastic stuff, but don't think of it in an urban setting as your irrigation system. Because when we desperately need irrigation is when we don't get rain. So you might, in an urban setting, have a 2,000 litre rainwater tank, which is probably about as big as most people can get, fitting at the side of the house or something like that. When you put your irrigation cycle on, just for one day, you're generally, for a typical average size garden in Perth, using about 1,500 litres of water just for one cycle. So in other words, your rainwater system might last you half a week summer irrigation.
That's 750 bottles of milk.
That's right. It's not designed to water your garden. If you're on 5-10 acres and you can get a 200,000 litre rainwater tank, yeah, that might help you. But in the urban setting, the rainwater is to give you beautiful drinking water, and I say plumb into the laundry and or the toilet.
And then it just goes straight back into the grey water.
Yeah.
So you're sort of getting a double use out of it.
And when you think about it, the water is coming from the air, gravity. It is zero carbon cost. So if you're capturing that and sticking it into, because we are using beautiful, some of the most expensive water in the world, desalinated water, to flush down turds.
Yeah.
It's, again, people will look back and go, that is insane.
That was insane.
Yeah. That's right. So when we start to really value water, when we really see how precious it is, that's the sort of thing we can do. So rainwater becomes a fantastic way to reduce that impact.
Next one, simple one. Probably don't have to speak too much on this. Keeping our aircon between 22 and 24 degrees, right?
Yeah, so power bills, yeah. So aircon is a big one. The sweet spot for air conditioning is 22 to 24 degrees.
It doesn't need to be 16. Isn't it funny that we can put it down there, though?
Well, it is. And the thing we need to say to people is for every degree you go above or below that 22 to 24, so if you have it at 16 degrees in summer when it should be 24, for every degree, so that's 8 degrees less, you're using 10% more power for every degree you go above or below. So in summer, if you crank it to 16, you're using 80% more power.
You're nearly doubling your power bill.
And worse still, and I learnt this from air conditioner installers when we used to do workshops at the Home Expo, it'd be like running your car at 5,000 revs.
Yeah.
You're going to burn the motor out. The aircon motor is not designed to run efficiently.
It's like having your blender on pulse full ball. Yep.
Exactly. So you will burn out the motors. You'll use massive amounts of power. So keep it at between 22 and 24, 22 in winter and 24 in summer.
I think I think everyone can achieve that, right?
Absolutely.
And also I think the good technology these days is about having the timers and being able to have, the apps even that allow you to turn it on and off.
Yep.
Because you're not even wasting. It's so good these days. I think the technology is getting better and better, and we keep working towards that because we need it.
We do.
Next one. This is huge for me. This is what we're always thinking about when we're developing. Building for, and this is part of planning as well.
Yeah.
Planning officers are good with this.
Yeah.
Building for Northern Light.
Yeah, magnificent. And when you've spent time in a passive solar home, you will never go back to dodgy houses that we have.
Mate, they sell for way more.
And absolutely. And, you know, until we brought the energy rating into houses, so it's now mandatory 6-star rated homes, as you know. Until then, the average house was probably 1 or 2 stars. Would you accept 10 or 20% result for anything else in life? And yet that's where we live.
A lot of people still do.
And it's appalling. Okay, so orientation is very important. I say to anyone, get the compass out. And everyone has a compass. It's in your phone. And if you don't know how to access it, I guarantee your kids do. Find the compass, walk around your house. Find out where northeast and northwest is, because that's where the winter sun is. And you need to make sure that that arc between the northeast and the northwest is where you let the winter sun in. Find out where the southeast and the southwest is. That's where the morning sun is going to rise in summer, and that's where your house is going to be under attack. And we mentioned off air that the sun needs to be seen as Jekyll and Hyde. In winter, at this time of the year, a warm, sunny day is just magnificent.
Are we in one of those periods right now where when we're in the shade, it's freezing?
Yeah.
And when we're in the sun, it's the best
beautiful.
day in the world.
Fast forward a few short months, and we will be cursing that sun. When the sun hits your windows and your walls in summer, that's going to translate into heat coming into your house, which means you need to use the air conditioner. So the sun, particularly the morning and the afternoon sun, should never be hitting any windows and walls on your house. If you're serious about reducing your energy consumption, and you can put external shading. External shading is very important. Good. Trees are great, but any window, the weak link in the chain for your house are windows.
Yep.
1 square metre of unprotected glass. So again, I'm doing this on radio, but it doesn't help very much, or podcast. 1 square metre of glass. That's not huge. If the summer sun is hitting that window full, the heat coming into the house, or that room, is equivalent to a 1-bar heater on in that room. So when you see these city beach...
It's a microscope on
It
the
is.
ant.
That's right. That's it. And when you see these, McMansions staring out over the ocean with these massive windows, that room will probably get to about 50 degrees in summer, because the heat is coming in and you can't stop it until you do external shading.
And that's where the air cons come in, ramping up all the costs.
That's right. And the crazy thing is that somewhere coal is being burnt, heating up the planet to keep dumb houses cool.
Double, triple glazing windows.
Double glazing is magnificent, but it still is nowhere near as effective as external shading. So even and I have double glazing in my whole house. Double glazing is great, but if the summer sun is hitting those windows, it slows down the transference, but it still happens. And the kicker is it's very good at stopping the heat leaving again. That's what it's really good at.
That's the point, yeah.
So if you have beautiful double-glazed north-facing windows, but you don't protect them in summer, your house is going to be even hotter.
Good point.
So the other thing with energy, slashing your power bills, so external shading, internal shading in winter. So now we want to keep the heat inside and reduce those gaps. I think it was David Suzuki who said that if you add up all the gaps that are between the windows and the doors and under the sills and the eaves, if you added them all up in a badly designed house, which is most houses in Perth, the whole would be about the size of a basketball. So we are trying to keep a house cool in summer or warm in winter with this great big hole. It's tiny little gaps, but they all add up to the same thing. So plug the gaps. Make sure you have really good insulation, not just in the ceiling, but you insulate in the walls if you can, under the floor.
All those are things that you generally won't get from a builder. If you don't ask for it, they won't insulate your walls.
And that's why it's really important. You're going to live in that house, not them. And to be honest, they don't care. They're just mass producing a house. You need to, and it's the same with the house and land packaging landscaping. You need to be saying to them, I need you to improve the soil, because if you don't, just like a bad house, you're just going to use massive amounts of water or energy to keep it comfortable.
Now, that, I guess, it moves into that last tip, I guess. It is passive soil landscaping. I guess that means that we should be looking to have some height in our landscaping where there is the northern light.
And deciduous. So that arc between the northeast and the northwest, we need to remember as well that the sun changes not only intensity and how long it's affecting us. So in Perth in summer, we get about 14 hours of sunshine. In winter, we get about 9 hours of sunshine. And the angle of the sun changes. So now, after June the 21st, the angle of the sun was 34 degrees. December the 21st, it's right up to almost vertical.
And that's why it gets so hot. The vector is just
Yes.
so much wider.
Yeah, and so if you have trees to the north, and again, the right plant in the right place for the right reasons, between the northeast and the northwest, that arc, you need deciduous plants so that they lose their leaves in winter, so you get that beautiful flood of winter warmth, and in summer, you've got the canopy, which is going to stop that hitting your house.
I think these are some fantastic tips, mate. We're 26 minutes in, but I tell you what, I could go for another 26. I think it's one of those topics where you can just get so deep in the detail, but just generally having these things in mind, either when you're building, please think about your orientation, and even if it's just about making money, recognise that the buyers will be looking at this thing. There's nothing worse than a dark, dingy living area, right?
In ACT, which was the first area in Australia to bring in mandatory disclosure, so you had to not just get the termite report and the report showing you had the hardwired RCDs, the smoke detectors. You have to have an energy efficiency report. That's now mandatory, so it's exposing the lid on McMansions.
Yeah.
Those houses, energy-efficient houses, are selling for 10 to 15% more because people go, oh, my God, this is going to be such a better house, lower costs, and it's more comfortable.
Well, it's finally becoming a factor now. I think 20, 30 years ago, whether you spent 20% or 30% more on your bills didn't make that much of a difference because our bills weren't that big.
Yes.
Now they're a factor.
Yeah.
It's like buying a more energy-efficient car because petrol prices are starting to become a factor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we recognise that in our house, those bills start to become more expensive than rates, for example. The rates are big enough. So
that's right.
when the consumption on top of that comes through, we're spending hundreds of dollars a month just to own a house.
And you think of Corona, and it's not so bad over here, but you'll think of lockdown, what they now know for energy consumption, it's plummeted in the CBDs because people are not working in offices, but it's skyrocketed in homes. So anything we can do to reduce the power consumption, and again, as I said, the real kicker is it makes the house more comfortable and livable when it's naturally cool in summer and naturally warm in winter.
Last one, it has to be the colour of our house and driveways, right? It's just been, I think it's been the cool thing to do for the last 15 years is make our roofs charcoal and even our driveways.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, look, if you could flick a switch so it was white in winter, white in summer and black in winter, that would be great. But a hot, dark coloured tile roof will get up to 80 degrees. Water boils at 100. So if you have 200 square metres of a dark roof, you are essentially saying, I love big power bills. I love giving money to Daikin air conditioning. Please heat my house up so my family can only survive in this house by using a massive whirring air conditioner.
There's a reason Test cricketers wear white.
Yes, indeed. And people often say, so getting to your point about, unless you're English, I remember going to one of the Ashes tests and all the English cricketers were wearing dark caps. And I said, they clearly haven't had any physiologist who's West Australian based going, man, they're going to fry their brains. Yeah. I mean, I liked it because it meant they perform poorly. But yes, absolutely. If you live in this part of the world, white and you have big protection, wide brim hat, the house needs to be seen the same way. So when I bought my house, the Hammy Hill Sustainable Home, well, we made it the Hammy Hill Sustainable Home. We painted the roof white with a special paint which has got insulation in it and the albedo effect. It reflects back the heat in summer. That made the house about 3 to 4 degrees cooler in summer.
I think that's something that can easily be mandated across planning with new house and land estates.
And some, like I know Alkimos, which was a Lend-Lease development, they mandated that the houses had to be light-coloured roofs. So getting the last bit, which is the thermal mass. So I'm a big fan of reducing the hard surfacing around your house. So imagine a stinking hot day in Perth. It got to 45 degrees, the sun goes down and everyone goes, hallelujah, that day's finished. Well, if you have surrounded your house with charcoal grey paving or you've got bitumen or, God forbid, artificial turf, all for that 16 hours of heating during the day. That beautiful material has just been quietly absorbing that heat and releases it back out. So if you walk out onto that paving at 2 a.m. the next morning, still warm.
Yep.
What does that mean? It means your air conditioners are sucking in warm
and you're
air.
starting warm the next day.
That's right. And your whole house is going to be hotter, and you have to use more power, more energy, more coal being burnt, heating up the planet to basically keep your badly designed home and landscape cool. That's why we say the garden should be the biggest room and the natural air conditioner, because it's only that shading with trees and shrubs, ground covers, and things like shade sails, shade cloth. All of those things will help to cut down that insidious negative impact for you and the family.
Mate, fantastic. I really appreciate today.
Pleasure.
We're going to have to keep having more of these. I appreciate it. Thanks, Chris Ferreira from Forever Project. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Okay, let's move on to the suburb spotlight. And today we are talking about one of Perth's most expensive suburbs, most affluent suburbs, aspirational suburbs. It's Cottesloe. A lot of people have been waiting for this episode. I've had many personal messages saying, do Cottesloe, do Cottesloe. And today we're doing it. And I'm very thankful to have one of Western Suburbs' #1 agents. It's Jayson Renouf. Thanks for coming back in again, mate. It was Swanbourne, and now it's Cottesloe.
Yeah, appreciate you taking the time to invite us in, Trent.
What's the difference?
Well, look, I mean, really, there's not a great deal of difference. I mean, obviously it's a name and a postcode, and that might mean some to many, but actually in dollar terms, and I guess locational benefits and otherwise, there isn't a great deal of difference. It's, I think, a common misconception. You look at the ocean front of Swanbourne, it's every bit as expensive as the ocean front in Cottesloe.
It's the same ocean as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's the same colour water. Many would argue that the northern end has got, which Swanbourne is obviously a continuation of, has got stronger locational benefits. So perception's a big thing. A lot of people will think that Cottesloe is going to be more expensive, but I think that's due to the fact that if you look at the geometric shapes of the two suburbs, Cottesloe fans out to the ocean front. So it's got a very wide frontage to the ocean, where Swanbourne, in contrast, is the exact opposite. It's like a piece of pie with the narrowest point on the ocean front. So the closer you get to the ocean front, there's less properties
that will sell in that higher price range.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of data.
The blocks in Swanbourne are a bit smaller as well, aren't they? A bit more terracey.
Well, there's a section, the Allen Park precinct. I've just sold 3 there in recent weeks, and they're typically 306 square metre green title lot. There's 278 square metre lots, but they're not on the ocean side in the sort of Cottesloe Village precinct, which is in between. It's the eastern side of Cottesloe, which a lot of people forget about, but between the highway and the railway line, close proximity to Napoleon Street and whatnot, certainly growing immensely in popularity. They're 278, 279 square metre lots, but on the ocean side, more commonly 500 to 600, say. But again, it's that representation of the ocean front and the ocean views. I guess one further comment is that certainly it's probably true to say that the Cottesloe section has more favourable topography, which then presents greater opportunities for ocean views.
Which is a bit higher.
Yeah, it ramps up, particularly in the southern end. Cardiac Hill, though, Princess Street there, Pier Street. It just really ramps up, which just gives,
more houses, more views.
Exactly, yeah. Where Swanbourne's a bit flatter.
Cottesloe benefits from the name, from the beach, the accessibility to it. A lot more people would drive through it and therefore think, I'd like to live here one day, whereas Swanbourne, being such a protected and private suburb, can sometimes just be out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah,
which has its own benefits.
Yeah, look, totally, and you're 100% right there, Trent. That's very accurate. Cottesloe's got the brand, it's got the awareness, and all the rest of it. And I've had clients at times ridicule me for suggesting that the prices are the same, but the data reflects that they are the same. In fact, one street, North Street, which borders Swanbourne and Cottesloe, the data, I'd suggest, is higher on the Swanbourne side of the road.
When we come to bringing families in here, there isn't a Cottesloe senior high school. Where are kids going to school from pre-primary up in these places?
Sure.
Especially look, the demographic says if you can live in Cottesloe, you probably can afford kids to go to private school. But what if they can't?
That's fair. Yeah, my kids... personally, they go to the local North Cottesloe Primary School. Had a great experience there. Lovely peer group, and I think a great school. They've then moved on to private schools at the end of that, or that's the plan, and my eldest has already. But certainly a lot of the kids, my second son is in his final year at Northcott this year, And it seems that probably, I think a lot of the kids, if not at least half, are going to Shenton, which has got a very good reputation. And
Bit of a drive, though, isn't it? It's not like the local high school.
Well, I mean...
It's one high school for the whole western suburbs, really.
Yeah, I guess so, but it's not a long way away. It's on the train line, and it's a pretty easy commute from Cott, so it's not like it's a big deal. And I guess it's very well regarded. I think academic being its specialty, and it's scoring
no
very
questions as to the quality of the school.
Yeah.
But I think most people wouldn't have to travel 3 or 4 suburbs to get to their local state school, and the suburbs aren't big.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is, you've got a train station that goes straight from straight from your front door, nearly in Cottesloe, to their front door in Shenton Park. So it's not like it's a huge commute.
No, but if you go back to in years predating the introduction of Shenton, no disrespect to anyone, but I think the previous state-run high schools, secondary, were not, I don't think, held in anywhere near the same regard as Shenton is. So geographically, perhaps you are correct, it's further away, but I think the quality of education seems to be perceived to be a lot higher. But you are spoilt for choice as a child and as a parent. If you want to put the checkbook on the table,
if the checkbook's on the table,
Yeah.
there are a number of girls' schools within a kilometre. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous how dense the girls' schools are there.
Yeah.
And then you've got Scotch, you've got Christchurch. Take your pick.
Yeah, John 23rd
23rd.
too. Yeah, and I guess in more recent times, economic rationality, and foolish not to admit that the world's been a harder place for some for the last decade. There hasn't been as much money flying around, perhaps, and that's perhaps also one of the reasons I think Shenton's been a lot more popular. I think John 23rd's one of the harder schools to get into. Iona, I know, is very popular for the girls as well, and it's a Catholic-based school. It's a bit more affordable. I've heard nothing but positive comments regarding the school as well.
When it comes to people who are coming into the suburb, where are they coming from, and at what age are they generally coming in?
A lot of migrants, obviously from oil and gas. A lot of medical migration too. So that almost in the minority. If
you're a local,
I'd suggest you are an absolute minority. Definitely that's been my experience. Not to say that's a bad thing, but so many new people to the area, and in fact, if there is downside to the change of rating and prosperity of the area, it's nothing against the people that have come in, but it has pushed a lot of other people out because if you grew up in the area, my vintage, there's not a lot of people who actually are going to have continued on in the same suburb.
So what you're suggesting is Cottesloe wasn't as affluent a suburb 40 years ago as it is now.
Mate, you're the poor cousin in the western suburbs. I mean, definitely when I was a kid, Peppermint Grove, Darkheath, Nedlands, Claremont were a big step above Cottesloe and Swanbourne. I mean, even when I started in the industry 29 years ago, Cottesloe was regarded by many as a scruffy beachside suburb full of a lot of rentals. A lot of farmers owned property, holidays, stay by the beach, this sort of stuff. And it was probably a fair comment. There are still a lot of block value properties in the area. And I think a lot of people do give up a lot in the way of improvements to live in the location, perhaps reflecting that they put a higher rating on the lifestyle than they do on having a third or a fourth bathroom. Or because if you look in the Northern Beach suburbs, to contrast, one of my reps predominantly sells in the Northern Beach suburbs, and just about every house has everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Media room, 4 bathrooms, all that. Where Cottesloe, that's
probably
a minority.
because I think it's because we've all got a budget, a pie, as you would put it, right? And the more percentage of that pie that's taken up by land value, the less percentage of that pie can be put into the third bathroom or the extra activity room.
Yep.
And just dependent on where it's important for you to live based on, I guess, your perception of your social status, where you grew up as well, you'll make a decision as to whether you'll make that compromise to live in Cottesloe, or you want the mega mansion or the much bigger 2-story house to live in North Beach. They're both the same ocean. They both have fantastic beach lifestyles. They both have fantastic bakeries and coffee shops and surf lifesaving clubs. But if you want to live in Cottesloe, you're probably paying the extra $1 just for the land.
Yeah, you look for sure. And, you're starting off at $3,000 a metre and rapidly accelerating from there. And the main body of Cottesloe you're referring to, previously, perhaps that is where the sacrifice is made on the improvements. Then you go forward west of Broome Street, you might suggest. Broome Street heading west. So what I would refer to as the immediate beach precinct. You're going to the beach on foot with a towel on your shoulder. You've perhaps got some views.
Bathers, undies.
Yeah, that's right. In that precinct, that's a different story. $8.5 million properties, $10 million properties. There'd be $15 million properties through there. One fellow just purchased a house at the other end of the street for I think 8.5, and then bought the house next door for in the threes. So that's a momentary residence while he constructs the one around the corner, which is on the ocean front. Swanbourne, actually, not Cott. But, there is a more moderate midsection of Cottesloe, and then it is truly an exponential curve once you head west.
I think Cottesloe represents a lot of the new money in Perth, or at least the last 10 years worth of new money. As we would recognise Peppermint Grove, Dalkeith, that's very much the old money. There's a lot of crusty dinosaur sort of lifestyle around there, not a lot of amenity when you think about it. There's obviously the location, but the amenity is actually quite low, and you compare that to a bit more of the township availability and obviously the ocean and the coffee shops and the vibe in Cottesloe. You feel younger, you feel a bit more, the sun's on you a bit more, and therefore a lot of that money at the expense of your Dalkeiths and your Peppermint Groves has been migrating over to Cottesloe. That choice where you might have someone come over from South Africa or the United Kingdom with quite a bit of cash, they're making a choice about probably those three suburbs and Swanbourne. And what we're recognising is a lot of them are seeing that lifestyle value because it's all the same. It's river or ocean, it's all western suburbs. It's not really a different, same school zones. They're choosing Cottesloe, and that has to be a lifestyle reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And from my own personal experience, as I say, having grown up in the local area, worked there all my working life, I don't think there's another suburb that the perception or the rating has changed so significantly. For example, most of the mates that I grew up with grew up in Dalkeith and Nedlands, and virtually everyone I can think of at the moment lives in either Cottesloe or Swanbourne. That would have been seen as an unusual move or a backward step some 40 years ago. People would have thought you're strange if you're moving from Dalkeith or Nedlands to Cottesloe. They would have thought that you're either
what went wrong in your business.
Yeah, you're getting divorced or going broke, or you're slightly eccentric or whatever. But
now it's an equal choice, and it's a personal choice, and people are making that choice.
Well, Dalkeith and Nedlands, you could argue, is quite affordable compared to on a rate per metre.
We had Mark Anderson in here 6 weeks ago, and we both agree. I mean, I've purchased in Netherlands just off of Steve's last year, and you look at the square meterage rate in the western suburbs. There isn't a better square meterage rate, especially still with access to great amenity, than Netherlands. It doesn't get any better per square metre. And I think a reason for that is it has sucked a lot of potential buyers towards Cottesloe over the last 10 years at the expense of a Nedlands and Dalkeith.
Yeah.
And it's because, in my opinion, there has been no gentrification, there has been no rezoning, there has been no investment into those two suburbs, that peninsula, for at least 25 years. So people that look at that and look at Broadway and go, Jesus Christ, there's nothing going on here. They look at Waratah Ave and go, geez, it's a bit old around here. And it's the new zoning, hopefully, that my belief is, that came in last year of your R60s, your R80s around these suburbs, which should inject some of that new cafe strip, the younger people who can afford that price point. Because in a place like Nedlands and Dalkeith, there is only one price point. It's quarter acre, older house in the $1, $2 or $3 million. And that's a problem because you need variety. Now, if we bring that back to Cottesloe, what is that variety outlook?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm getting a lot of those empty nesters that you're just referring to because of the relatively homogenous offering, in place at Nedlands and Dalkeith. I'm getting a lot of people, just sold a couple of places to people who have come across from Nedlands and Dalkeith and looking at 300 square metre lots, paying $4,000 a metre. Certainly that's not cheap, but, you're getting in a great spot. Cottesloe, it does range from 279 square metres at a common minimum through a whole precinct, mainly on the eastern side of the line, and then commonly through sort of 550 to say 615, 640 on the ocean side. Anything above 640 or 650 square metres in Cottesloe is considered a big block. People ringing up wanting 1,000 square metre block, they're pretty few and far between. And regardless of your budget, you'll find it very difficult to locate one.
Let's talk about that budget. What is the cheapest residence that I could buy in Cottesloe?
I can sell you one today, Trent, for 1.1 million or from 1.1 million.
So you're rarely getting a first home buyer coming in. Is that the case?
I would argue or suggest that in the time that I've been doing this, I mean, the top end has gone up substantially more recently. What was 3.5 is now 4.5. It's jumped. But the bottom end, around that early millions, when I started doing this, I look at, say, the ratios between, say, Cottesloe and, say, Mount Hawthorn, which I always used to put people into at a price point. Great suburb. A house in Mount Hawthorn literally was the price of a 2-bedroom apartment in Cottesloe. They were the options I would say to people. 130 grand, I can sell you a 2-bedroom flat in Cott. If you don't want a flat, my advice would be let's go to Mount Hawthorn and buy and I literally did that myself.
It was only in the year about 1998, 2000 where you could buy a house in Mount Hawthorn for that price.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I bought one for 130 odd. Great suburb. That's where I moved out to first and sort of edged my way back. But great suburb. It's just a bit far away for work from me. And but now, if you look at the ratios, that 2-bedroom unit in Cott is maybe 500. You could buy one cheaper, but 500, let's say. You can't buy a house in Mount Hawthorn for 500. You'd struggle to buy one for $1 million. Yet you can buy a house in Cottesloe for $1 million. So in actual fact, the bottom end relatively to Mount Hawthorn, the bottom end of Cottesloe and indeed Swanbourne, at the bottom end is comparatively, I think, better value than it's been in 20 years. So I actually think there's an arbitrage at the moment at that entry point. Because
worst house, best suburb.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can spend $1 million. I mean, Trent. You cover a wider area than I do, so I'm sure you'd have a greater expertise across the metropolitan area. I'm very focused in a small area. But I'm sure you'd confirm, you can spend $1 million in virtually every suburb in Perth now. I mean, you can, where back in the day, an entry-level house in Cottesloe, you just couldn't spend that much money in
Certainly
a lot of
west
suburbs.
of the freeway, you would definitely find data for pretty much every suburb if the house was big enough.
Yeah.
Where you could at least spend 7 figures. And that would be at the top end, but you could head 20, 30 Ks north of the city and you'll have multi-million-dollar houses. There are $4 million houses in Mullaloo.
Yeah. Dianella, there's lots of
Dianella's
lots of,
had $2 million houses,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, totally,
and that's obviously based a lot on build price. But what you're saying is, again, to get into Cottesloe, it is still an accessible price with a realistic house on it.
Yeah, and I mean, again, if I was a buyer in the early millions, I would definitely be looking at Cottesloe. But I guess what I've observed is that a lot of people with their budget don't go, okay, I've got 1.2 million to spend. What's the best suburb I can buy? A lot of people are wedded to a particular area. They grew up in Dianella, or they grew up in Darkeith, or they grew up in Wembley, whatever it might be. And you understand that because it's not just about money.
It's about your lifestyle. It's about your family. It's about
what
your
you
work.
know.
Yeah, if you're doing well for yourself and you grew up in Mount Lawley, it's probably unlikely you're looking to Cottesloe unless you have a real penchant for that area or unless you work there. Even if you did have the money to go there, it's like anywhere. Most of the suburbs I speak to with local agents, the price point might be $700,000, and you could go to many suburbs in Perth for $700,000. But most people that the evidence shows that buy in that suburb, they grew up in that suburb or the suburb next to it.
Yeah, exactly.
What that demonstrates, though, is as a buyer who's looking to either get in or understand their market when they're selling one day, is that your market probably on most cases, unless it's an international market, will most likely be someone who has grown up in the area, and therefore understanding what has done well around you and why is actually not too hard. You look at Cottesloe, there's a lot of Hamptons theme going on. You're probably not seeing the same houses as you are in City Beach, which is a lot more glitzy, glamour, Florida sort of house. Cottesloe is a bit more understated. It's a bit older of a suburb, and there's a bit more about the more quality appointments and a bit more understated in that space, right? When you think about a young couple who's got skills and great interior design aspect, a lot of the houses in Cottesloe still have fantastic bones to even buy in the worst house in the best street and renovate that to their heart's content.
Yeah, and a lot of people, that's certainly been an increasing trend, that people are getting the bungalow and putting that money on the back end of it rather than knocking it down. And to me personally, these aren't heritage listed homes, so that the client could knock them down. It's nice to retain that fabric of the suburb that attracted people there in the first place.
Let's get on to development. I think we could spend time talking about more price points, but the reality is anywhere from 500 grand, but more specifically a mil, just based on whatever you want, it'll be build price plus. You could go into the millions. It's an easy answer. Let's go into development, because I don't see much going on in Cottesloe outside of the knockdown build a mansion strategy, which isn't a strategy. It's more of a preference because you got the money. What could be done? What is being done? I'll Google Town of Cottesloe draft planning scheme. There isn't one for me to find. What are we missing in Cottesloe that could really be that missing middle?
There's a couple of apartment blocks that have sort of been mooted on Marine Parade at the moment. I'm not sure that they're going to get up. I think they're trying to do some pre-sales at the moment. I haven't heard much in the way of sort of sales. But essentially, one thing that's enabled the suburb to maintain its fabric is that the block sizes, as I said earlier, are quite small anyway. There's not a lot of big blocks.
There's not a lot of development opportunities.
No, there's not, because it's typically R20 and there aren't any 1,000 square metre lot. The few that do come up, typically what I've found is that the end user, Ma and Pa and the three kids, will pay more money than the developer. They just want the big block, and they'll pay more money than the developer.
That's a massive reality. The higher you get in price point, the more risk there is as a developer that you're actually going to compete with the prevailing market, because it's more likely that the owner occupied market will be willing to pay more, there's very much a strong relationship there between price points. So the lower down you go, the more likely you'll be able to compete as a developer. The higher up you get, you either have to be doing some really dense stuff, or you're probably going to lose to an owner occupier who's willing to just get in.
Yeah, and there was a group that was certainly pushing pretty hard to get some zoning concessions and
well, you think along Napoleon Street, Station Street, it's pretty low rise for what it could be.
Yeah, and it's not, and
it's a commercial area. I can't see what negative impact it would have to be able to stack 6 or 7 stories of apartments on top of the boat shed market or something like that, and they'd have great views as well of the ocean and not blocking anyone else's views.
Yeah, you're right. My offices, the shops that I've got, I've had a few approaches from people wanting to purchase my site and the one next door and that sort of thing for that sort of opportunity. But then what their problem is, there's people like me sitting there who are happily running their business and don't want to move.
Disruption.
Yeah, I don't want to be disrupted. I like sitting where I'm sitting in my old shop, and it works well enough for me. And a lot of the other owners, frustration that I've borne as an agent, although I'm part of it as an owner, is there's just a lot of sitting owners who, fair enough, they're entitled to, just don't want to sell, happy just ticking along, just happy with the
yield.
Yeah. I'm probably not even worried about the yield greatly, I'd reckon, because the yield wouldn't be good. It's not, trust me.
Yeah. Let's talk about median house price, the last question. Arbitrary number, as always, means nothing, but what is it?
Yeah, around 2 million.
What do you get into 2 mil in Cottesloe, and what would you buy yourself if you had 2 mil in your pocket?
In the main body of Cottesloe, you're at $3,000 a metre. So what comes to mind to me at that price point is, Brighton Street, Lion Street. Wouldn't be a flash house. You've got a couple of $100,000 into improvements, but a fantastic spot. Sensational locational benefits. You're going to be from 1.85 to, I've sold a couple recently between 1.85 and 2.2. Certainly, good functional family homes. If you wanted to step back a little bit from that, down the hill a little bit more, a bottom end of Florence Street and Hawkstone, I think that section between Marmion and Curtin Avenue for the value there. Slightly smaller blocks, about 1.5 for your block value. So I one recently for 1.65, certainly a dated but very habitable, accommodating family home. So that's a little bit more affordable again. So I think that there are some very strong locations. If you're willing to not have that super sexy, flashy house, but you just want a functional family home that's perhaps a little bit understated and perhaps dated or modest, the lifestyle to me, you can't see you ever going back on your investment. And how I see at the moment, the differential between west of Broome Street and east is double what it normally is. So you go back the last 10, 20 years, at the moment it will cost you $2.5 million to move forward one street. It's double the price.
Is that because the houses are better?
No, I'm saying block value.
Yeah, wow.
So block value.
So does that mean that the east of Broome Street has dropped, or west has increased?
West has increased notably, and that's sort of in that ocean view sort of precinct.
Over the hill, essentially.
Yeah, over the hill,
yep.
1st June sort of thing. But to me, there's a clear arbitrage opportunity at that sort of sub $2 million level. I think it just screams of absolute fantastic opportunity, because clearly one or two things are going to happen. That ratio has never been like that in 50 years. So one or two things I'd suggest is going to happen. Either the ocean front's going to go down, or the eastern end's going to go up, or a bit of both. Either way, and I don't think the oceanfront's going to go down because the buyers are lined up. It's just shortage of stock that's preventing sales.
It's ridiculous. The Cottesloe is really the canary in the coal mine for me. It was the first suburb in Perth to start rising back in 2017, and that's because there's always a stream of people with money looking, especially coming from somewhere, and there's just not enough people looking to sell.
Well, if you're going to lob into Perth and life's treated you well, and you've got kids, well, where are you going to want to live? You're going to want to live where the majority of the good schools are. That's an absolute priority. Well, the majority of the best schools in WA are in a very short travelling distance from Cottesloe, and most people are going to want to live by the beach. I mean, I grew up in I had no idea. I thought all the beaches looked like that.
No, the beaches in Western Australia are by far the best beaches around the world.
Oh, spectacular, white sandy beaches, and it does create a nice sense of community, like anywhere you've got a nice park or something. But yeah, I do think there's great opportunity in Cottesloe at the moment at that entry level, at two specific sections, that entry level in the early millions and around that $2 million bracket, just like one street back from Broome Street or even sections of Broome Street. Ridiculously good value. There's been sales there around the $2 million mark, which just seems crazy to me. I personally felt they were undersold significantly. But you come back to Brighton Street, one street further back, block value 1.8, 1.9. Move forward 2 streets, it's $4.5 million at block value. So that ratio is just distorted in my opinion. And I think the people who buy in those sections, just stepping back, I think the market's going to favour them well as when things kick into gear again. And naturally, what I've said to people for many years, and I'm sure I'm not the only agent who says it, who has said it rather, is that the price increases in Cottesloe typically follow the sea breeze. I mean, they often used to start in the south because that was the moneyed end of Cottesloe. Now it's all across the front, but then they just push back street by street, and before you know it, they're over the hill, and then running back towards the eastern end of the suburb. But
Jayson, fantastic insights. Obviously, your area so well, and it's good to have an agent actually push out today some buying opportunities that make sense and explain why. Very rare to hear that. I really appreciate your time, and the listeners very much appreciate your time. Mate, hopefully have you in again for another one.
Thanks, Trent. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!